crack on. So, morning everyone. My name is Michael. I'm from Raindrop Digital. We're a specialist agency in the user experience field. One of our niches is e-commerce. We work with clients across the UK and international, from startups to global companies, assisting them in basically growing their stores, making sure they're user friendly, and essentially making them a lot more money than they would before. Today's talk is sort of going to be taking it back to basics really, and talking about e-commerce systems in general, some high level items around the elements of e-commerce stores, understanding the right solution, hosting security, managing payments, how to scale an e-commerce website and adapting to online challenges, especially with what's been happening this year. Firstly, I'm going to take it sort of back to internet sales as a percentage over the last few years, because it's been steadily bubbling away that e-com is moving forward and increasing. But the interesting take on this is how it's actually transformed this year due to the COVID pandemic. Back in October 2015, all sales online were about 15% of retail. And then it moved to 17.5%, but by May this year it's at 32.8%, which is nearly double. We have seen that it's slightly dipped in August, but in general e-commerce has sort of really taken a step forward this year, and it's something where a lot of companies are now looking, saying how can we transition to online, or how do we make our online offering better. I sort of predict that this could end up around the 50% mark in the next couple of years. This Christmas is going to be very interesting to see how sales grow online versus retail stores and how that's going to be affected. But it's one of those where when the dot-com boom happened, there was like, was this just going to be a small period of time? But with e-com, you can see how it's steadily been bubbling away, and all of a sudden a change in the dynamics, and now it is taken centre forward. So it's something to be very aware of how this is going to grow, because it also means there'll be a lot more competition in the market, and there'll also be a lot more challenges facing e-commerce store owners. So we'll get started on the key elements of e-com sites. So one of the first things really, as everyone will see, is when you're actually building your site. One of the major areas that we pinpoint out is the high quality photos and product descriptions. A lot of the times that we're looking at websites through different data sources, we see how the effects of not having good product photography and very high quality product descriptions can actually affect an e-commerce site. One of the other areas to look out for is an easy checkout process. Nowadays, with all the different devices, it's going to be easy on all of those. Having a clear site structure and navigation, again, easy to navigate, easy to find products, navigate yourself around. That is something to look into. And then more of things from a back-end process. One of the key elements is actually having the right system in the first place, so a scalable content management system. I'll be talking through these. There's a lot on the market, but one of the worst scenarios you can be in is having an e-commerce website set up in a content management system that in a year or two's time, you end up having to rebuild again and switching platforms. It can be a nightmare. So that's something to really get right at the start. The next area is looking at your customer support and policies, a major area now, especially if you look at the trending of the graph I explained earlier. The support systems that need to be in place, you know, if a parcel goes missing, if customers can't check out, it needs to be slick and easy. And then last thing is your stock management. So depending what you're selling, managing stock is a major area, and it can be a major area that for a lot of people, it can turn into a bit of an admin nightmare. We've got clients where if they haven't got the right stock system set up, they end up with more items out of stock than in stock, and then end up losing out on sales. So there's just some brief elements, but we will be talking through a lot more of these throughout this webinar. So the first thing is we need to look at how we get to the right solution. So e-commerce has always been seen as a traditional, you buy products online, add it to your basket, check out, and that's it, done. But actually now there is so many different ways of looking at how you can actually sell online. The majority of clients are changing how they do things. So from a point of view of pure e-commerce, I would say that is pure product to basket. But then you've got other forms, so more what I would class as interactive commerce. So one of our clients, you can actually completely frame your own photo on the website. It's got a full-blown configurator, and then that gets shipped to you. That isn't really a traditional product to basket because it's got a lot of moving elements. And from that point of view, it actually needs to be a custom system. So it isn't always just about selling a pure product. One of the other areas is subscription-based systems, how these have really grown over the last couple of years, whether that's software, whether that's food. These are really growing areas to look at. The next area is online payments. This is more towards service-based businesses. So we've actually worked with law firms who want to take online payments rather than having to do offline or payments over the phone to make it easy for the customer. Again, this starts to flow into e-com. The other area to look at is membership and trainings. So like fitness websites, gyms, all of them have had to move online in the early phase of the pandemic, but this is something that has been growing for the past 3 years. Another area to look at is events, so tickets for live or virtual events. These are now all done through major e-com systems. And then the last one is virtual products, so things like music, ebooks, downloadable items. Again, a lot of these can be done through an e-commerce solution. So I would say with e-com, it's actually quite a broad spectrum now, and it's not just your typical scenario, but this just is enabling to give you ideas of different ways of how you can sell online. So now we need to look at the actual platform and how we get started. So whenever you're looking at an e-com platform, well, I would say there's 5 areas to look at. So the first one is to really consider what the total cost of ownership is going to be of your e-commerce site. And I'd split this into 3. So you've got build, which is basically the cost of building the initial website. You've got the ongoing costs, and these are the actual running costs of the website, and they need to be factored in. That isn't just the point of view of having the site. That can be transaction fees, hosting, application costs, cost of shipping, every little item that comes into play of the cost of sale, basically. And then the last one is maintenance and new features. So if you're starting to grow the e-commerce site, what's the expected features you're looking to put in? What would they cost? Knowing that early on helps how you're going to choose the right platform. The next thing to look at is management. So how easy is it going to be able to manage your inventory, your stock as a whole? How is that going to be handled? How is your delivery systems going to be handled? It can take a long time to manage an e-com store. So if there's inaccuracies in any of these processes, that's going to take more time away from what you want to be doing with the site. From there, it's then picking the platform to meet all of those. Is it easy to set up? Does it have the functionality you need right there and the functionality to grow? Is it easy to update and manage, or will you have to always have a developer or an external agency working with you on it? The other area to then look at is your marketing integration. So this is something where you would need to look at what analytics software you can put into the website. Can you link it into things like Facebook and Google now? From an SEO side, does it have all the groundwork that you actually need to get that off the ground? Can you link it to a CRM? And then finally, it's always worthwhile looking at what the predicted benefits are of the platform you're going to choose, whether that is at the start or if you're going to be doing a full migration or changing of platform. You have to look at what features are going to be available, how it's going to help you save you time, what's the value of improving the user experience, and what would be a time to see a return on investment. So when we come to e-commerce platforms, there's 2 different ones on the market. So your first one is self-hosted. So this is where you have this on your own server, or you have a hosted solution, which is where the application is purchased from a vendor like BigCommerce, Shopify, where you pay a monthly fee and they handle everything. These are some of the biggest ones on the market at the moment and the most popular. So from a self-hosted perspective, a lot of people choose WooCommerce because it's a low startup cost and very easy software to get using. It's part of WordPress. So if people have already got a WordPress site, they can bolt it on, or they can start from scratch. Magento, which is owned by Adobe now, is, I would say, for larger retailers. There's higher costs associated with that, but it's very scalable. From a hosted point of view, you've probably heard of Shopify. That is one of the biggest platforms from a hosted perspective. You pay a monthly fee, they look after everything. You just build your site and manage it. That's the same for BigCommerce, which they've been around for quite a long time and are now really starting to move into the market more. Squarespace, and they've got a full commerce section, very similar to Shopify. I would say Squarespace is a bit more like a hybrid of a WordPress style Shopify experience. And then some of the ones that have been around for a while but are losing market share are OpenCart and PrestaShop. Obviously, there is a lot more platforms on the market. And there's also custom ways of doing things. So looking at self-hosted platforms, there is benefits, but there's also drawbacks. The main benefit really is the flexibility. With a self-hosted platform, you have full control over the whole website, and that is how it appears, how it's customized, how you host it. There's a lot more features available and they can be at your discretion. You can add plugins or apps in when you need them rather than being always in the website and having to pay for them. The other aspect of a self-hosted platform is that you can host where you want to host that site. And then if you need to move it, you can choose to move that when you want to, and you can scale that up as and when you need to. You can choose your own support partner to work on that. So you've got more of a bigger pool of people to work with, and basically switching platforms can be easier depending on what you do. So things like WordPress and WooCommerce, if you were to then upgrade to Magento, you'd be able to export everything out and move that in quite easily. There is some drawbacks though if you're going to try and do this yourself. It's harder to set up, so you need to have a good knowledge of servers because it'll be yourself that will be installing it on a server. From a maintenance perspective, a lot of these softwares are open source, so they have regular updates that you'll need to apply and make sure that it's secure. The cost may increase as you scale, so depending on the way you go about it, if you're on a Magento style website and you're going to start scaling that up, that can increase costs on your hosting. And from a point of view of support, you don't get any support from the vendors really, and you end up having to pay for support contracts. So that's the drawbacks really of the self-hosted platform. If it compares to a hosted platform like Shopify, it's very easy to set up. You can have a store set up in potentially half a day. A lot of them come with built-in themes and they've already got a checkout set up for you, and you don't have to worry about hosting and all of those kind of security issues, because something like Shopify would look after that. If you've got issues, you can usually reach out to them and they will help you as much as they can through their support systems. The management of the interfaces are usually pretty intuitive, and because of the way they work on a pay monthly model, it's usually around cost, and the fees should be pretty clear, but it's one of those to always check. The issue with more of a hosted platform is switching can be expensive. So if you were to try and switch from Shopify away to a self-hosted, is a complete rebuild, and it sometimes can be very difficult to get a product list out to move that over and very quickly. Depending on the pricing tiers, the support can vary. So as much as you can get full support, if you're on a lower package with some of these companies, they'll only give you a certain amount of support. So some of them maybe only do email support, whereas if you're on a higher tier, you can get phone call and live chat support. Customizations can be limited. So if you take something like Shopify, you would have to be on a premium plan to be able to change any section of the checkout. Whereas if you look at a self-hosted platform like WooCommerce, you've got complete control of that checkout. And then the fees can grow as your store grows. So some of the hosted platforms compared to self-hosted will limit you on traffic size or limit you on the amount of products you've got. So that is something to always take into account, as if you grow your store, you may end up actually having to pay more per month. And then you've got the argument of, is this the right platform for us? Would a self-hosted one be better, and vice versa? So whenever we're advising clients, we would say like a checklist really of the platform would be speed of deployment. So how easy would it be to get the website up and running, an e-commerce website up and running? Does everything have to be a code level change, or can you use things like a page builder or a drag and drop builder? A lot of CMS systems now allow you to do most things visually without needing to know how to code. What essential features do you need in that site to get it moving? And does the platform have those features built in, or can you add them on? What's the monthly budget for being able to manage and control a store? From an SEO side, what's the budget for that? Do you do it yourself? Do you get someone in to help? What technical support is available? So if it's a hosted site, you need to have a look at what is available. Is it 24/7? Is it limited hours? And vice versa, same on a self-hosted platform. Is the agency you're going to work with got high-level SLAs for you? How many products and product options will you have? Some people like to start out small, but if you plan to grow, or if you have over 1,000 product lines, it's worthwhile understanding how easy it's going to be to manage those. And basically, how do you plan to grow the store? One of our clients has gone from over 100 products to 400 products in the pandemic, and then now they've actually added a subscription model off the back of that. So in a short space of time, they've turned themselves from a very small e-com business into growing and actually adding more product offerings. So understanding how you're going to do that is very essential, because if you choose a platform incorrectly at the start, it might not be able to do some of the things you plan on doing even in 6 months or a year's time. The next thing that I'm going to discuss is hosting and security. So this is one of the most biggest areas for an e-com business, and throughout our experience is the thing that is always actually taken lightly. And with everything that's going on with the changes in GDPR over the last couple of years, and with everything around data breaches, this is one of the most important areas to get right at the start, but also throughout owning a store. If you have something where your server or your hosting is insecure, this can cost a lot of money to your business. So what we're going to do is talk through what to consider, what the different types of hosting is available, what security is available, and PCI compliance. So the first thing when we're looking at hosting is bandwidth. So you probably heard this term quite a lot, but this is the amount of data that your website can transfer in a given amount of time. So if you think of this like the size of a pipe, the bigger the pipe, the more water can pass through. If it's a small pipe, not as much water can pass through. This is the same with your website. So if you have high spikes of users visiting the website, and you don't have a lot of bandwidth on your server, this can slow the website down and it can fall over. So this looks at how many customers your website can handle at one time. So first is always worth check what's available there. Second is file storage. So file storage is key, because with any e-commerce site, you will be uploading a lot of images and a lot of content. If you have a small file storage available, you could max that out pretty quickly, and then you end up with your website falling over. One of our clients, like I explained earlier, who does the picture framing, they had a set amount of space, but because a lot of customers upload images as well as them having images on the site, their storage could get maxed out very quickly. So that needs to scale constantly. The next thing to look at is the uptime and availability. So you hear a lot of times things about 99% uptime, but depending on how busy your store is, you've got to work out what that actually equates to, because some companies will offer a 99.999% SLA. And this could be, the difference between that and 99% could be 4 hours difference of your website being down. So it's always worthwhile checking what the service level agreements are available, because if the store is down for less than even an hour, you could be losing quite a lot of sales. The next area to look at is scalability and auto scaling. So as I've explained earlier, around traffic allocation and making sure it can handle as many customers at one time, it doesn't mean that you have to have all of those resources available at those times, because you might have quieter periods and busy periods. So looking at a hosting solution that has something called auto scaling, which basically means the server copes with demand depending on the different times of day where you're busy, can be a more cost-effective solution and easier way to manage your store. The next thing is to look at security. So any good hosting service, whether that is self-hosted or a hosted e-commerce platform, will explain about all of the checkout and basically the security that's available around payment card, so PCI compliance, if it has a firewall, what antivirus is available, and if it has DDoS protection. The other thing to consider is backups. Having backups is necessary. If the website goes down or if there is an issue and you need to restore it, you need to restore it from a backup usually. So it's always good to work out from your host how many backups are available. Is it daily? Is it every 4 hours? Is it hourly? How long are those backups stored for? Is it 10, 30 days? One of those things is always ensure you do have that there, because some of the cheap hosting providers don't always include it in their plans. The last thing is to look at speed. So with the way your website's built, that will affect speed, but also the effect of what hosting environment you choose will affect hosting in a sense of speed. So if we look at a site that's on a shared hosting environment versus something that's on a cloud environment, that could be a difference in 2 or 3 seconds. So it's very good to work out what kind of server you're going to be choosing and what that speed is going to look like. Then also, it's also flexibility. How easy is it to manage and secure that server? Do you have to do that, or does the hosting provider do that? So that's the things to consider. So following that, if you are going to go down a self-hosted platform like WooCommerce or Magento, there is different options on the market for you. So first one is shared. So this is a very simple setup, which means more than one website is on the same server. It's usually affordable and very good for starter websites. The downside to this is that if there is a lot more websites on that server and one of them basically hogs all the resources, it can slow your website down. So it's worthwhile checking what kind of server that is, how many websites are on there if you go down that route. The next one is a virtual private server. This is the most balanced out of all of them available, because it's still a shared environment, but each website is private. So basically, the resources themselves are dedicated to each website, so you don't get the same issue as a shared environment. They're more reliable, and because of those guaranteed resources, you don't get as many issues as a shared environment. The downside to a virtual private server is cost. They can look cheap when you first look at them, but you always get just an empty machine and you have to set everything up. So that can then take a lot more cost on if you've got to get an external in to help you set it up. The next option is dedicated hosting. Nowadays, this is considered quite old, but this is essentially you get a server to yourself. Usually this is actually a physical server in a data center, which means if you do go down that route, you need to have some very, very in-depth service level agreements, because if there's a hardware fault on that server, it could be down and you would need that hosting provider to replace that very quickly. The next option is cloud. So a lot of people have heard this, but essentially this is exactly the same as the virtual private server, but it's all run on a virtual machine. It's basically a huge network, and all its power is pulled dynamically. The advantage to this is auto scaling, as I mentioned earlier. Depending on what resources are needed, that site would then take those resources and they get billed based on what resources it uses. So think of companies like Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud. They are very good for security because if you do get something called a DDoS attack, you can mitigate it and move it very quickly away from the problem and you don't get as much downtime. But this does require a lot of knowledge if you have to do that yourself or work with a hosting provider that can do that. And then the last option really is managed hosting. And this can be any of those options I've discussed, but usually this is managed by a third party and you pay them. So sometimes that can be a better solution because it takes the headache away of managing a store. But also it depends on what their service level agreement is. And it's always good to work out what the risks are of using a third party to manage versus you having access as well. The next area is security. So this is a really major area now because e-com sites are targeted by hackers constantly. Most of the time, this is because of the sensitive information that e-commerce websites have, whether that is credit card numbers, PayPal users' details, passwords, full names, addresses. They don't just target large companies now, hackers. They will go after any vulnerable store they can because that enables them to get hold of customer details. So this is something that needs to be taken seriously. One of our clients, actually, when we did a review of their hosting, we found that you could actually hack the website within 30 seconds, which basically that meant that a hacker could get in, download all the customer details, and then basically they've got access to then start committing fraud. So this can actually cost a business a lot of money if that happens, especially with all of the fines with GDPR and data breaches. So it's something that has to be understood and looked at as part of a whole e-commerce system. There is things that can be done to mitigate a lot of this. So working with a hosting provider or with a third party, the first thing to look at is a firewall. So essentially any good host will have a firewall in place. Think of this as a protective layer to stop people from trying to gain access to the host or the website. Having a firewall with an inbuilt alert system is helpful because you can understand if people are attempting to try and hack your website. The next thing is to have an SSL certificate. You are required to have one, but sometimes when you look at payment systems, they say, oh, you don't need one because they will handle all of the security. But nowadays you do because customers could be logging into their account. Anything from a website connection that isn't secure, hackers can actually get in and see what's being passed across when people are loading the website on their devices. So it's always worthwhile looking at what SSL certificates are available. You can get free ones like Let's Encrypt, or you can go down a more paid for route with people like Norton or McAfee. It just depends on your cost of ownership, basically. The next area to look at is DDoS protection. So this is a very big common threat now. So it's classed as a distributed denial of service, but it's usually referred to as just simple denial of service. But essentially, this is where your website gets flooded with loads of bots in a short period of time with the aim of overwhelming the website and causing it to crash. Usually a good host will detect it and try to stop it, but it can happen. We've seen people like Amazon get hit with a DDoS attack. Google were hit with one recently at their data center in London, and that took off quite a few websites. So it's worthwhile just understanding what protection levels are available. And it's also worthwhile, even if you're on a hosted platform like Shopify, reaching out and speaking to them about that as well, because sometimes those are hacked because they're in similar data centers to self-hosted. The next thing to look at is your domain name privacy. So something that is an add-on when you purchase domain name, but it is actually quite important because basically, when you do a lookup of that domain, hackers can have a look at that and see who owns the domain and get their contact details, so they can then start to try and commit fraud that way. And then lastly is virus protection. So the main thing here is hackers will try and get into a website to install malware, but they also trying to get in through people's weak passwords. So always having strong passwords and keeping the platform up to date is necessary here. Also, the website is one aspect, the host is another. So they both need to be as secure as possible. If the website's really secure, but the host is insecure, that's a chink in the armor, and vice versa. The next phase around all of hosting security is PCI compliance. These are the standards that are set via, and it was originally created by Visa, MasterCard, and Amex in 2004. It's evolved over the years, but essentially every e-commerce business has to comply with PCI compliance. The main thing around this is, depending on what payment methods you have when you take payments on the website, is to the level that you will be required. A lot of the payment providers will do this for you, but it's still worthwhile going through all of the checks to make sure you're compliant, because you can actually have a risk of a fine, and especially with GDPR now. There are 12 requirements. It might not sound like much, but it can get very complex depending on how big your store is and how many transactions you want to be taking per month. Level 4 is the lowest and level 1 is very high. Like I said, there are penalties for not complying, and it's always worthwhile checking which of your platforms you choose and what level of compliance they have. To break this down, we've put the 12 here for you. So the first thing is about safeguarding card hold data by maintaining a firewall. So as I said before, with security of your website and your hosting, if you have a firewall in place, that will help with your compliance. Having strong passwords and security around how they are stored. It has been known, you've probably seen on the news in the past, of how hackers have got into companies and been able to download all the passwords. Again, they need to be stored very securely and unique so that doesn't happen. Safeguarding how cardholder data is stored. So if you have a payment system where people can store their cards to use again in the future, it's worthwhile checking where that's stored and how that's stored. Encrypting cardholder data, so when this is transmitted over the payment. So basically, if you're in the checkout, you're making a payment and then it goes to confirmation, how is that cardholder data encrypted? What antivirus software is installed on the server and in the website, and is it actively updated? You need to create and sustain secure systems and applications. So this goes back to the security aspects that I explained earlier. Keep cardholder access limited on a need-to-know basis. So for example, if you were to be taking payments over the phone, you need to have a system in place of how those cardholder details are used and then destroyed and who has access. And then next thing is the physical access to cardholder data needs to be restricted. So if you have a login to your payment system, take something like Stripe, and you can log in there and look at what orders have gone through, what data is in there and who actually has access to see that. The next thing is to have logging available on the access to this. So if you have systems where cardholder data is stored, have you got a log of when it's being accessed, who has accessed it at that time? Are you running frequent security systems and processing tests? So this is basically testing your system to see if it's secure, but also not just from an automated solution. Are you testing it internally yourself? And then basically the last thing is having secure policies in your business around all of these areas. So having in-depth SLAs is one of those. Having a security policy and all of that kind of area is going to be majorly helpful in passing this. Like I said, depending on the different levels available, that you will be falling into from a level 1 to level 4. These 12 areas can be very in-depth depending on that. So there is different websites available to help you go through this, but it's something that every e-commerce site has to do. The next thing we're going to talk through is how to manage payments. This is a very, very key area, because if you choose the wrong payment provider at the start, sometimes switching can be difficult, or the fees could be that high that you need to switch quite quickly. So it's worthwhile understanding what solutions are on the market and how you're going to be taking payments. Some of this also affects the user experience of a website. Some customers like to pay for a specific system, or they would like to pay with things like Apple Pay and Google Pay now. So your traditional payment system is a merchant account and a payment gateway. So this is the main area for how most systems are used. But nowadays, with some of the newer people on the market like Stripe, they are more of an all-in-one solution, and they actually combine everything together. So that can be actually very easy to set up. And the other thing to consider when you're managing payments is, are you doing online and offline? So if we take a traditional bricks and mortar store with an online store, sometimes they will take payments over the phone. So depending on what you're selling, PCI compliance and GDPR as well, it's worthwhile understanding which systems are available to allow you to do that and how secure that's going to be. There are many, many different payment providers on the market. These are some of the most popular ones, and to be fair, a lot of what our clients use. And these are all different types. So if we go for something like Klarna or ClearPay, you've probably seen these quite a lot now, where customers can pay to the purchase and they can split that over 3 monthly payments, or they can buy now and pay later. Stripe has been one of the biggest growing payment providers because they made everything very simple in setup, but also management, and their fees are quite low, and basically you don't pay a monthly fee. Payo, which is basically SagePay. So Payo bought SagePay this year in a rebranding. This is one of the long-standing ones, and customers are very used to seeing. I would say SagePay and WorldPay are on a par there. You've got things like Square. Square do online payments and point of sale systems for in-store, which can be very helpful because that keeps fees down. PayPal is very popular and a lot of people do use that. Amazon launched their Amazon Pay system. This uses your Amazon account to help basically with the payments. So all your details are held there, your cards are held there. So from a web standpoint, it's very easy to integrate. And then a lot of people are now using Apple Pay and Google Pay when they're online. So if you think of ease of payments, you could easily pay on your phone very quickly without needing to leave the website, but also it's all handled through that app. So they are getting very popular now, and a lot of companies are rolling that out. With all of these different payment options, it's always worth looking at what the fees are. Some of these charge monthly and then charge transaction fee. Some it's just a transaction fee, which I'll be covering later on. So depending on which payment system you use, you've got hosted versus integrated. And this is all about the experience of the customer, but it does also affect security of the website and your PCI compliance. So a hosted gateway is where you redirect a customer to that payment processor platform. So SagePay and WorldPay. This is very usually easy to set up. They are responsible for all of the PCI compliance and data security, and it's one thing for you to not really worry about. The downsides is that some countries don't always like these kind of payments. And also, it's one of those where from a user experience side, some people might think, oh, I've gone away from the website, what's this, and abandon. So that's one thing to look at with those kind of gateways. The second is integrated. So this is where the payment gateway is actually integrated into your checkout. So you just put your card details in and check out. The advantage of this, it can be very quick to set up. So if you take things like Klarna and Stripe, they are a plug and play for most platforms. The downside is that you will need to check all of the security and PCI compliance, and now that's handled. And if it's not really handled securely, that will put you at security risk. So they're the two differences, and some of that is down to customer experience, some of that is down to how you want to handle security and compliance. So there's quite a few things to discuss there. The next thing to actually look into with all of these is the actual transaction fee. Sometimes it can look very appealing that it's 1.9% plus 20p per transaction, or it's a simple monthly fee of £20. But there are also more than just that fee involved when it comes to transacting online. So the first thing to do is check what the fee is per transaction. Like I said there, is it a rolled up fee? Is it a monthly fee? Or is it one way? It's both. The other thing to consider with all of these platforms and transaction fees are what cards you're accepting. Depending on the card you accept, there are different fees involved. Some providers charge more for Amex, or some charge for non-European cards. So some of our clients do sell in places like America, and some of the cards that people use over there cost more to put through on the website. So that's with people like Stripe. The other thing to check is if you're going to sell to multiple countries and you're going to do a currency conversion. Some of our clients allow people to pay in euros, dollars, or pounds. Again, you can pay a conversion fee there. The next thing is chargebacks. So this is a form of consumer protection where a card company or a bank requests a charge from a merchant to be reversed. This can be when a customer inquires with the credit card company, and due to, it could be an order not arriving, or they're unsatisfied with their order and they've tried to get a refund and it's not happened, you can be charged back that from the card vendor. So that's something to really consider. Then the last thing, and this takes us all the way back to the platforms, some platforms actually charge you a fee for putting the transaction through. So Shopify have their own internal payment system, but if you want to use a different system with Shopify, they actually charge you an extra 2% additional fee on each transaction. So it's always worthwhile checking each one of those platforms, as well as the card providers, what fees are involved when you take that payment, because that can have a severe dent on profit margins. The next thing with all of these, with accepting payments, is how to reduce fraud. It can happen, and it's one that is very frustrating on both from a customer side and from managing a store. But there is what I would class as two types of fraud for e-com businesses. There is what we class as an account takeover. So this is where people hack customer accounts through different schemes, like phishing schemes. So they try to act like a company, and that people log in and then they get their details. But also this can be people to try and brute force and hack passwords. The second is identity theft, which is basically where fraudsters hack into databases, steal usernames, steal passwords, steal card details, and then start using those to transact online. So this all wraps around the security of your website. The main thing here is to manage the risk. The main thing to check really is fraudulent payments, because you can actually be held financially responsible for the loss. So if you have a fraudulent transaction, you then get the chargeback process, and that can hit your company's reputation. Many options with payment providers try and help reduce this, but it's one of those that it's always good to have alerts in place based on the kinds of transactions that are going through. So what I'd say is monitor transactions and reconcile bank accounts, if possible, daily, but it's one of those that just keep an eye on as much as possible and check for inconsistencies in billing and shipping information. That can be a red flag. One thing to do is with your payment systems, keep an eye on IP addresses to alert you the countries that people have purchased from. So If you know there's a country where there's a lot of known base of fraud and you don't sell in those regions, it's good to have a look at those IP addresses, because that can be an indicator someone is trying to run fraudulent transactions through the website. With any payment system, you need to look at the address verification system. So this is where the card looks up against the address when the payment is made. And then if that matches, it allows a payment through. If it doesn't, it stops the payment. This is a lot of times we see when a client emails or phones up and says, oh, customer says they can't pay on the website. And then when you have a look, they could have changed their address or used a different address with the card. So that's one way, that's a good flag, but it's a good way of reducing fraud. The next thing is requiring the security code on the back of the card, which is the card verification value. This is something that all payment processors should implement, and they shouldn't be stored, but it's good to check that that's in place with the card vendor that you're using. The next thing to help reduce fraud is, as I've mentioned a few times, is strong passwords. But another way of doing this is now having multi-factor authentication. So having customers receive an SMS or an email, or using a verification app, they put a code in to log into their account. This will improve security a lot, because you've got less likely people, if the password has been hacked, they still can't get into the system. But this isn't something that should just be for customers. It's something to look at to see if the platform itself offers that for administrators. Because WordPress is one of the most used CMS systems, I think it powers about 30% of the internet now. It is always seen as a platform that can be hacked. So if there's extra security that can be for the administrator, that's going to be really helpful in reducing this, because we have seen in the past WordPress websites hacked. And then finally, depending what system you use, whether that's WordPress, Magento, Shopify, make sure that all software and the platform is up to date. Vulnerabilities can happen in open source software, and that can be an easy way for a hacker to get in. So always keeping those up to date is a priority. Some sites where you pay for extra features, which are in the form of a plugin or an app, some companies we've seen have forgot to pay the license fee every year, and then they don't get the updates. If there's a vulnerability there, then that could be the way that a hacker can get in. So fraud is a major risk now for e-commerce owners, and it's one thing that by reducing this, it also reduces the impact and the risk on the business. So as with systems, we put together a short checklist and what to ask a payment provider. So depending on which one you want to choose, so what are the different rates or fees for different types of cards that will be used? What are the chargebacks, or what are the timings around these chargebacks? If it was to happen, do you bill on a monthly basis or on a per transaction basis? What's the fee for taking offline payments? Is there a separate fee for the actual payment gateway and the merchant account, or is it all in raw cost? Is there any fees when we do refunds? PayPal now actually don't return the refund fees, which again can add on for your cost of sale. What are the contract terms, and is there any early termination fees? Some companies like Stripe, you pay per month, it's a monthly contract. People like WorldPay, you can be in a contract for a year. Is there monthly minimum processing requirements? So do you have to put a certain amount of payments through to be on a certain plan or to get a certain rate? Is there any processing limits, and what level of support is offered? If you end up with having an issue with your payment provider, it's always worthwhile understanding the support that's available. Is it live chat? Can you phone them up? Is it email? People like Stripe, it's purely email support, unless you go onto a premium plan, which is enterprise. Or if you look at people like SagePay and WorldPay, you can phone them up and get support. So that is really, really helpful to understand, depending on what you're going to do with your e-commerce website, if you're going to manage it or someone else is managing it. So I would say those are all the basic areas of looking through an e-commerce system. So looking at the platform, looking at the payments, looking at the hosting, those are all the things that are needed to get started. Once you've got started, it's all about then scaling this. And scaling can bring its own problems. So you can get started and then all of a sudden you start to grow, and then there can be issues in managing the store. There could be payment disputes, the quality of customer service. How are you going to drive quality traffic to keep it growing? How are you going to improve the website so you keep the sales? And is there ways of automating and integrating into your systems to make it easier? So the first thing to look at is payment disputes and returns. So as much as it's with an e-com site, everyone's like, oh, you need to be selling more products. I would say it's all about profitability of the site. If you have a high returns rate, you're not going to be making as much money as you could if you reduce that returns rate. So the other thing also around this is payment disputes. This can start to cost the business money. So it's worthwhile looking into these areas first, depending on what products you're selling. If you look at, so I suppose the best thing to do here is look at returns rates. So if we look at like a fashion business, sometimes fashion, you get high returns rate because people order a small and a medium, and then they always return the small. So that kind of stuff, when it comes to return rates, it's best to actually look at the experience of the website and how you can improve size guides or explain what size is on offer to reduce those return rates. But I'd say from a payment dispute aspect, the most common disputes you get is item not received, which is if the courier's not delivered it or the customer claims they've ordered it, paid for it, and it's not been received. The item is not as described on the website, which again, this goes all the way back to the start about having correct product descriptions and high quality photos. And then the other one is unauthorized transactions. So as I was saying there about fraud and payments. So this is looking at when a purchase was made, or if a buyer feels they've been charged twice. So we have seen it with certain payment systems where a buyer has got in touch and said, oh, it's come out of a bank account twice. And when we've looked in the back of the system, it's actually been a failed order and then a correct order, but the failed order pre-authorized the card. It's always worthwhile checking those kind of things around unauthorized transactions. There is a way of preventing these kind of disputes. And if you end up in a scenario where you're getting a lot of chargebacks, this is where it's about improving the process around payment disputes. So best thing to do is have contact information clear and easy in a contact area on the website, having a very responsive team available to respond to these quickly and professionally, and then having dispute resolutions in place. If a customer tells you they intend to file a chargeback with someone like PayPal, the best thing is to try and get a resolution before that, because it can be a very drawn out process. It can be escalated and it can give you a lot of work. Another way with all of this is having a very clear returns policy and an easy way of returning. It isn't just, obviously it can be a cost of business, but also if you have a very good return policy and an easy process, customers will come back more and purchase again. The next thing is preventing item not received, which can result in a lot of chargebacks. So one thing here is realistic delivery dates and keeping customers up to date as possible with notifications and shipping tracking. Sometimes some businesses we've seen don't use ship insurance. Things can go wrong in transit, which can then cost the business quite a lot of money. If things get damaged en route, that's another issue that you can have, because you've got to get it returned, you pay for all of that, and then you have to provide another product. So it's always looking at what insurance policies are available with your couriers. The other thing is to have a look at is when you do choose a courier, be aware of the insurance exceptions and what's the liabilities on that loss or damage, and see what coverage you actually get, because some don't always cover. The other thing to help out is the stock levels of when a customer orders, and this goes to inventory management. someone orders but actually it's out of stock. So having things that are clearly labelled in stock and out of stock will help on that side of things. As I said earlier, items that are not as described, detailed, accurate descriptions on the product pages and through the process. Some things depending on what you're selling, making sure they disclose if an item is close to out of date, depending on what you're selling there, or if you're selling new and used, or if you're selling ex display, always make that adequate on the page and disclose that to the customer. If a buyer gets in contact, always try and be as helpful and keep making sure that the problem is small to them and don't allow it to grow into a larger one. And as I described in the payment section on unauthorized transactions, trying to just keep those kind of disputes and chargebacks to a minimum through having clear processes available above. And it's mainly this area is all down to customer service. So if you've got a very good help section on the website, which we'll be going on to, this will help limit this. The next section that we look at with scaling is inventory management. Depending on what you're selling, this can be one of the areas that holds a business back from going from a startup and scaling it up. Quite a few of our small scale e-commerce clients we work with, this is one area that we've been spending quite a lot of time on them with, especially with the pandemic, because the increase in sales and people shopping online has brought a lot of added pressures on how to manage inventory. So the first thing is looking at logistics and fulfillment. So depending on how you choose to do your fulfillment, this can impact how you scale. So the scalability of that, how are you going to be doing the logistics, depending on your lowest volumes and highest volumes? How is the stock being tracked and traced internally? How are you coping with purchasing and getting the stock into the business? Or if you actually make your own products, what's that demand going to be and how can you cope with that demand? How is stock managed when it's arrived and who is responsible for ordering more stock or making more in a sense of from a development side? One of our clients, they actually were only a bricks and mortar store at the start of the pandemic. And then due to the increase in sales, this brought a lot of challenges with stock, but it's got to a point where now they've actually set up their own very small warehouse and their own fulfillment. It's not a large scale operation, but it's something that has helped them cope with the demand. So it's always good to look at what options are available and how you can adapt. The next thing to really look at around logistics and fulfillment is actually the inventory itself. So from an inventory side and stock system, this impacts not just the offline and the management, but actually the management of the store. So I'm using a stock keep unit system. SKUs are mighty important. A lot of startups forget to use this, or they use loads of different ones from all their different manufacturers, and then it can get confusing. So we always recommend setting up your own SKU system and having a method. The main thing here is trying to move away from having it in different Excel sheets and having a very central point of sale system internally. You could use something like Vico, which is an inventory management solution. There is people like Linworks that are out there, which will help with managing all of these processes. Once you've got those inventory and stock systems working pretty well, and then got to go back to fulfillment and see how that is going to be managed. So how is everything being stored and labeled for people for picking and packing? How is the order being processed? And how you're going to be shipping that out. When it comes to shipping and delivery processes, again, this comes back to that can affect payment disputes, can also affect sales on the website. So it's all about looking at those processes internally and what's going to work for you and the customer. So what's going to be the delivery timescale? We've got a client at the moment that's under such huge demand that they're not being able to turn around orders within, well, it's actually a 7-day working day window now, which you think you order today, that means it might not get sent out till next Friday, which from an expectation perspective on a customer, that could be too long. So there's always ways to look at that process. From a courier perspective, do you just use one courier or do you have two, so that if one is struggling to get the parcels out, can you go through a different process? The other thing to look at with your delivery is packaging. So from a packaging point of view, if you're getting damaged parcels, how is that being improved so that doesn't happen? But also, is that an area where you can improve it so that the packaging is actually a low-cost alternative? Some companies, it can be quite an expense depending on what they're sending out. So each one of the areas in inventory management all has a knock-on effect, not just internally, but it has a knock-on effect to the customer. So it's got to be factored in on both sides. The next thing to look at is customer service and support. So there's many different ways of how you can do this on a website. The worst thing is to not have anything available, or just having a simple returns and delivery policy. The major thing is actually looking at how you can support the customer as much as possible. So one thing that we've looked at is what self-service channels are in use, and majority of people will go straight to the website and look for a self-service solution. From that, some people will use social media, some people will use live chat, but majority will try and do self-service straight away. When looking at that from a cost perspective, self-service is the cheapest solution because the customer is trying to solve the problem themselves. If you start to then look at how many staff you've got to manage customer service, if they're having to manage a mailbox, manage live chat, or manage phones, that cost can significantly increase. So it's always good to weigh up which options are best for you and for the customer. Out of all of this, a recent survey had shown that most customers are looking for fast response times when it comes to customer service, consistency across the channels. So if they ask a question on live chat, is that going to be the same information that they see in a self-service area on a website? If they contact you on social, will they get the same response if they went through live chat? The next thing to understand is how knowledgeable the staff are when it comes to customer service. And then from there, what the contact points are. So one major area that has helped a lot of companies is live chat. That can be a lower cost solution rather than having a call center or people on the phone available to speak. There's many different live chat solutions on the market now, and there's even managed ones where you can actually outsource people who would be managing the chat for you. So if you're in a startup mode and you want live chat, that can be a good way to look. If you're going to go down the self-service route, this is all about having a very in-depth knowledge base and FAQ section on the website. Having it clearly laid out, sometimes having videos and images can actually help a customer. But majority of the time, what we usually say to clients is get the self-service thing set up first, then start looking at the processes depending on how many support requests you're getting through. And from there as well, you can actually look at sometimes with self-service, doing it through a customer account. So if you could connect the website's account to your internal support system, that can save a lot more time. And so customer service is key here. And actually nowadays, it's not just about having one system available, it's having a multiple aspect and making sure that's consistent. Once you've got your e-commerce store set up and you're working through making sure customer service is good, your inventory is good, and you're not getting many payment disputes and returns, it's about driving quality traffic. So depending on what products you're selling, depending on what type of e-commerce store you've got, there's going to be different marketing channels available for you. You've probably heard of quite a few of these. but majority of people will rely on SEO, search engine optimization. A lot of people will be relying on paid advertising, so pay-per-click and Google Shopping. Some will be using Facebook and Instagram, and then some will be using referral schemes and affiliate schemes. Depending on what you're selling, actually will depend what channel you use, because from the key in the title here is quality traffic, because we've seen in the past a lot of customers rely on display advertising, which is banners on other websites, but that isn't always good quality traffic. A lot of that can produce people that just look at the website and disappear and don't come back. So the main thing here is looking at each channel and looking at the kind of users that are going to come to the website. SEO is a long-term game. Trying to get a store off the ground and scale up, you're probably looking at a 3 to 18 month process of optimizing your site to make sure it appears high in search engines. One area that is why a lot of users then go to paid advertising through pay-per-click and Google Shopping. Google Shopping is actually slightly cheaper than pay-per-click. It's got a lower cost per click there, and that can be a very good way to start up and get the site moving. A lot of our clients have moved to Google Shopping because of that. Another area to really look into is Facebook and Instagram and the point of view of advertising. So with the scalability of Facebook and with the way you can target people, this can be a very good way to get into your audience. There's ways of being able to link Facebook into the back of your shop to make an actual Facebook shop so you can promote products. You could be able to tag those products on Instagram to get people to click on those and drive through to the store. So that's probably a very good area to get started as well, because it is a low cost solution, and then you can scale it up depending on what your budgets are. And then one of the other areas is referral schemes. So this is being used a lot more now through influencers on social, but can be very good for just general customers that absolutely love your brand. So you can do schemes where if people sign up and make a purchase, you can give them a referral link, and that customer can get a discount off another purchase, or they get something as part of that. That might be a lower cost solution compared to advertising budgets or SEO, because you're relying on the power of your actual customers promoting you as well. And it's something that a lot of our clients have been looking into as well. But with all of these channels, it's about having a multi-channel focus, and not relying on one, because it was quite an awful experience for a client earlier on this year. Google turned their pay-per-click ads off because they said there was a security issue. At the time, there wasn't, but their automated system had a fault, and basically they lost about 30% of their traffic in a 3-week period, which then actually had a knock-on effect on sales. But because they didn't have any other channels working very well for them, like Facebook advertisements, a strong SEO campaign, or Google Shopping, that meant that they had a dip in sales. So it's always worthwhile, when you're looking at driving traffic to the site, making sure each channel is working effectively. And if you have a problem with one, the others can cope and bring you the same traffic and keep your sales. Once you've been getting the traffic to the website, it's all about the experience for the customer. So how easy is it to use the website? How can you keep sales? How can you reduce abandonment? So user experience is the next port of call for this. So the first thing to look at is accessibility. As much as a lot of people say, well, why do we need to make the website accessible? It is a requirement under the Disability Discrimination Act, but also it can actually make for a very easy experience if a website is accessible. In America, there's actually been a couple of cases, and one recently with Domino's, where they were taken to court for not having an accessible website. So it's not always just about making it better, it's also a legal requirement. But to be able to improve the user experience of your website, there's 3 ways you can do this. The first one is to run reviews and surveys and capture these from customers. There's 2 ways that you can do that quite quickly. So after they've purchased, you can send them an email, ask them to review their experience, or over a time period, you could run a competition to get survey responses if people give feedback, or you could actually intercept on the website when a customer abandons, asking them a couple of questions of why they abandoned. From that point, you'll be able to take all of that data in and start to be able to review that on how you improve the website. When you run a survey, you probably would expect around 10% response rate, depending on the size of your database and how many people order. We do run surveys quite a lot with our clients because it allows us to get to know the why and why customers not purchasing, or why they do purchase, or how we can improve from their aspect. The next thing to look at is analytics. So the most popular one and free at the moment is Google Analytics. This will allow you to understand how people are coming to the website, where they're abandoning, what channels they're coming from. But one thing that I will recommend is make sure that when you do get Google Analytics with your e-commerce site, you do get e-commerce tracking set up. Quite a lot of startups that we've worked with don't have this. And then basically from that side of things, we can't work out which channels are actually driving them good quality traffic and driving sales, but we can't work out where people are abandoning the checkout. So that is a clear requirement to look for and to have in place. The next thing is using something like Hotjar or other tools like that. So Hotjar is a system that allows you to take heat maps of your web pages, like your product pages, your checkout, to understand what people click on, what they don't click on, how far they scroll. It also allows you to take session recordings, which is basically recording of a visitor that goes on the website, and you can see how they move through, what they do and what they don't do. It also allows you to put surveys out. So Hotjar is a very, very good tool for that. There's actually a free plan, so you can get started on that quite quickly and start to understand how to improve your store. And basically, all of these things here are all about blending a picture together to understand how someone uses the website, why they're not purchasing, and how it's actually making money for you. So that's one area to really look at from a user experience side. One last thing that I would mention here is reviews. Reviews are a great way from a sales side of things, but they're also a very good way of understanding customer sentiment. So we've actually been able to utilize reviews like Trustpilot or FIFO with customer client sites to understand where issues are for customers and where things can be improved. So if you haven't got those in place, definitely look into those. That can be really helpful from a user experience side, but also can give you a lot of business intelligence for improving. The last thing here is automation and integration. So when it comes to e-com, there is a lot involved in managing a store, as I've explained. But one thing that can be done here to reduce business costs is to automate and integrate as much as possible. It'll allow you to focus on a lot more other areas in your business, like developing better marketing strategies or understanding product development. And also from that side, there's less likely to go wrong from a human error side. So first thing that I would recommend for integration and automation is your inventory system. Is your inventory system linked to the website? And from that side of things, is it making stock updates real time? Is it pulling orders in? The next thing is a lot of inventory systems now can allow you to actually automate the purchase orders. So basically, once stock levels get low, they can then send out a purchase order to a supplier that can then get shipped in, and you don't actually have to do anything there. The other good thing about inventory systems is they can have a returns portal. So instead of having to take returns through customer service, that can be all self-service through the same portal. And then basically once it's actually, the returns arrived in the shop or the warehouse and is being scanned, it will update everything in the system. So that's one good thing about having an inventory system that can link to multiple systems. The next thing is account software. So this can take a lot of time with bookkeeping, and one of our clients was actually doing all of this manually, line by line in a spreadsheet. So, and that was taking quite a few days a month. So what we've suggested is we link their account software in with their website and payment providers to save a lot of time here. Depending what your account software is, this can be easy or it can actually be very tough. So if you look at something like Xero, that actually links into things like Stripe and PayPal very easy, but it can also link it to inventory management systems easy. Whereas potentially being on Sage, you have to look at different tools, as a lot of software doesn't link into it. So again, going back to picking the right platform, it is worthwhile understanding what other systems you've got in place and how they link. Another area that can take a lot of time is managing shipping and delivery, as I've explained. One area here is a way of automating this. So you can actually link into your couriers from your website, or you could use it in an inventory management system. One bonus of this is some inventory management systems actually do automated shipping labels and printing for you. So it can actually set up everything for the day, and then it will print it out based on what the previous day's orders are. So that's a really good way of automating. The other area with the courier automation is actually the booking in and the shipping manifests. If you can get your website or inventory system to link that way, then you don't have to keep going in and typing in every bit of detail to get that arranged. And then the last thing is marketing systems. So if you've got a good email marketing system, it's very good to automate that in the website, because you can automate abandoned carts, stock notifications, review collections, and rewards and referral systems. The thing from there is to actually link it into a CRM system. If you can link all of that together, you'll be able to automate a lot more communications to the customer, but you'll also be able to build audiences off that for when it comes to doing Facebook advertising. By doing that as well, you'll be able to track each customer and understand what the lifetime value is, who are your high ticket customers, and how to reward them. So automation is a key area for most businesses, but in e-com, it can bring a massive level of benefits. And then finally, adapting to online challenges. So a lot of this is more to do with what's been happening this year, but also how businesses are adapting. So we work with a cheese company who used to do tasting events, and they were all physical. So what they've actually done is gone virtual with these, which has been an absolute game changer for them. So they've actually been able to ship out the product to the customer as if it would be in person. And then they go onto a Zoom or a Facebook Live and they follow the tasting experience at the same time. So that was a really good way of adapting to the challenges that have been faced this year. This has actually turned into a regular occurrence now, where they do 2 events a month, every month for this year and looking into the next year. So that has been able to help them through the pandemic. The next thing with the online challenge is always to understand demand. When your busy seasons are, when your low seasons are. Again, because of the pandemic, a lot of e-com businesses we work with have been at Christmas level operating for most of the year. So that is always worthwhile understanding the demand that's there and how that's going to continue. One industry that has seen a huge increase in demand was the cycling industry, to the point that they're on a 3-month delay. That also then links into your supply chain. So depending what you're selling and how you're selling, if a product goes viral or popular, can your website handle the load? Can you handle the processing? Can you get the stock back in place to cope with that? And then alongside that is queuing systems. So you probably saw there's quite a few things around B&Q where they had a huge queuing system, and all the supermarkets in the pandemic had a queuing system. These can work, but they also can cause issues where customers actually see that there's 100 people in the queue and they don't wait, they disappear and go somewhere else. So these need to be used in the right way. The impact of a non-performing website. So this is a major area to really look into. So this can be anywhere from if the website has gone down, if the website is not actually making any money. So you've got started, you've got a platform, and then you find out 6 to 12 months later, you're still no better off than where you were when you started. So from this kind of thing, it's always worth analysing with your analytics data to understand where the performance is and then start to look at fixing it. The other area from a non-performing site is also understanding your product lines. So do you have products that are not performing and are they costing you to keep in stock? So it's always good to keep looking at the different product lines you've got and optimizing them. Again, going back to the picture framing company we work with, every 6 months they review all of their frames to understand which ones are the most popular ones, which ones don't sell, so that they can keep the range optimal and they're not holding too much stock of ones that don't sell. And then finally, it's more about to do with the cost of fixing a broken e-com site. So when you experience technical difficulties, and they do happen, how quickly can you react from a customer service aspect? And what channels can you use to alert users that you know there is an issue and you're fixing it? What SLAs are in place for suppliers for the turnarounds? And do you actually have an internal process for identifying, troubleshooting and fixing these problems? I'd say this one is one of the biggest ones. If your website's down for even just an hour, it can cost you a lot of money. So these are some of the challenges that you're going to face and constantly face as you scale up. So that's everything from me this morning. I've left some time for questions. So if anyone's got any questions or wants to ask anything, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Michael, for that informative webinar, and thank you everybody for joining. Before you all leave, I'm just going to launch a quick feedback poll. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a few minutes to answer those questions for me. And then also just to let you know that this webinar was run as part of the Grow My SME program by Humber Growth Hub. So that last slide there did have the information for you to click on.
Oh, sorry,
it's okay. I'll be sharing the slides with everyone after the webinar anyway, so you'll have my contact details too. So if you're interested in joining the program, then send me an email or visit our website and sign up that way. And what that entails is you'll get a diagnostic. So you'll get a session with a business expert and they will run through a really simple diagnostic, just a few questions you answer online. And that kind of highlights any areas that need work, and then you and that business expert will work on developing a plan to figure out how we can help you, and then we'll work alongside you, and hopefully, make your business better. So yeah, if you're interested, then please get in touch, and I can put you in touch with one of the business experts. And then just to let you know, we've got a couple of other webinars next week as well, also run by other people from the CDI Alliance, which is where Michael's from. So Mondays is Internet of Things, and then Fridays is Accountancy Systems. Let me just see, I think someone's popped.
Yeah, we've got a question from Paul. So quick question on costs. How much should I expect to set up a basic commerce site versus more advanced? It does actually depend on the platform you choose and what you're actually selling. You can get website, depending if you're going to do it yourself versus you're going to get a third party in to help. But from a point of view of a setup cost for a basic commerce site, you're probably looking really anywhere between probably £2,000 upwards, but that really does depend on how many products you've got, what payment system you're going to use, and what platform you're going to be on. If you went with something like Shopify, it's going to be on the lower end, same with WooCommerce. From a point of view of an advanced site, if you have, for example, 1,000 product lines, you may look at something like Magento. You're probably there looking at more like £15,000 to £20,000. So there is a very big variance in cost, and it will depend on if you do it yourself versus who you choose to help you from a third party, or if you decide to get an internal developer to help you. Obviously, that's a salary more than just the cost of setting up a site. Hopefully that helps there.